Welcome back to another session of Communicative English. Like I told you in the last session, I concluded with the module 1. Today I'm going to start with module 2. The module 2 has totally been dedicated to the art of reading. Reading is very important because after listening and speaking, the person has to go to the stage of reading. Why is reading so important? Because in number of times you must have observed that you have skipped minor details, very minute details. Why this happens is this happens due to lack of concentration and the kind of reading that you are indulging in. So what happens is that while reading, you have to be very aware that what you are reading, and if you're not understanding any term or any word, then you have to look up into the dictionary. Reading is an art. Reading is a skill. It requires a lot of precision and concentration. You have to be very attentive. You cannot uh, go into the mode of communication selectivity. Sometimes it happens that you keep on reading, and after reading a couple of pages, you realize that you don't remember anything that you have read because your mind was somewhere else. Your mind was not there in the book. Your mind was not there in the notes. This is the major reason that you don't understand much of the concepts in one go. So now I'm going to share the notes on the module 2 and we'll be discussing the topic of reading. I'm going to share the notes. These notes are again edited and they have been created according to the syllabus. You can use them as primary source or the only source. You can use them as secondary source. You can add to them. You can edit accordingly. But see to it that the basic fabric of the notes should be maintained because they have been designed according to the need of the syllabus. Okay, now I'm going to start sharing. Now, this is module 2 and it is about reading and writing skills. Reading is a very active exercise and it needs you have to pay to the essence of reading and the questions are designed accordingly to test the wide range of abilities that are required in order to read and understand the kinds of course commonly encountered in graduate school. Now, if you talk about the abilities, you should not only have the ability to read. If you say that, ma'am, I know how to read, I'm not talking about the ability to read. Like this is a boy is standing. If you are able to differentiate between a, B, O, Y, and you are able to read the sentence a boy is standing, then I'm not talking about that. What I am talking about is the understanding of the message. Okay. Now, if you wish to understand, then you have to make deliberate effort. You have to understand the meaning of every individual word in the sentence. Unless and until you understand the meaning of individual words or sentences, you won't be able to make sense of what you have read. Reading requires active participation. As I told you that listening and hearing are different things. Listening is active and hearing is passive. In the same way, reading, you can say to an extent, is not the ability to recognize the alphabet, it is the ability to understand. What I am talking about is the ability of understanding and comprehending the words and sentences that are written. Understanding the meaning of the paragraphs and larger bodies of text. You must have seen that small kids they don't understand the whole word problem. Like suppose if I tell you if I tell a young child of class 3 or 4 that there are 500 people in a room, 230 are women, how many males are there, and uh, what is if there are 75 kids, then how many are females? Now, this is something very circumlocuting. You should frame the question very very simply because a child of 8 or 9 years won't be able to understand a very complex question. Like if I say, if I take an example of a small kid, when a word problem comes and it ends with what is left, how much how much is left. The child simply grabs up that it's a question of subtraction, he needs subtract. But suppose the question says that there are 7 vases and 23 flowers. Put flowers equally in each vase. How many are left? After putting flowers equally in a vase, how many are left? Now the answer to this question comes later. Firstly comes the understanding of the question. You have to understand and make out that it's not a question of subtraction, but it's a question of division. So now, because the word left was there, you have subtracted. You have subtracted 7 out of 23, and you have come to an answer that 15 is the answer. 15 or 16 is the answer. But that's not the answer. 16 is not the answer. The answer was 2. So, reading and then understanding the word and sentence won't suffice. You have to understand the paragraph and larger bodies. That is the whole page and the chapter and the book. Distinguishing between minor and major files. You have to realize. Just for example, there is no such rule for writing a paragraph, how long a paragraph should be there. But then for a matter of fact, you can say that a paragraph can be written in 15 to 18 sentences. Okay. Now, a paragraph can be divided into many sentences. A paragraph is made of many sentences like minor sentences, supporting sentences, major sentences. And then there is a sentence which is known as topic sentence. Topic sentence, as the word suggests, is a sentence which talks about the topic. You must have noticed that every student has a habit of reading, and while reading, they have this typical habit of underlining, bracketing, highlighting accordingly. Every student has his own visual fancies according to which they read and mark. Now, if you are into the habit of bracketing, highlighting, or underlining, what are you doing? You are marking the major points. That is a topic sentence. Because if you remember those sentences, you will be able to make out, or rather talk about, or write about the minor things that were present. You have to understand that while reading, you can summarize a passage. Reading is not enough. You have to summarize it. That comes handy when you are making notes. Now, taking notes and making notes are entirely two different. Taking notes is like when I'm dictating and you are taking notes. Making notes is when you refer to my notes, some website and some book, and then you are after referencing it, you are making your notes. That is note taking. But unless and until you understand the paragraph and you know how to reduce it, to summarize it, you won't be able to do it. Now, drawing conclusion from the information provided. Like you don't have to only understand, you have to even take out the conclusion. You have to draw an appropriate conclusion. You must be able to reach a decision after reading the paragraph or the information provided to you. Reasoning from complete data to infer missing information. Like if I say that x plus y is equal to z, then z plus y is equal to, the answer is x. Because it's a simple question, so you are able to understand. But when it comes to the terminologies, the grammar structure, and it comes to a paragraph, a book, a chapter, it really becomes very difficult because the student is not able to draw a proper conclusion. You have to, and you are unable to give that missing information. Sometimes you have to read between the lines. Between, like, there are problematic questions like if X is sister of Y and Y is son of Z and Z is husband of A, then what is A to X? Getting? So you have to find out the missing information and then read it and conclude. Understanding the structure of a text in terms of how parts relate to one another. Now, one thing can always relate to another because the paragraphs are written in coherence. Coherence means relatedness. And they talk about one unique factor, that is the unity of the paragraph. When paragraph talks uniquely about one structural thing, that is unity. But when the various factors are put together and they are related in certain way, that is coherence. So you have to understand what the paragraph is talking about or the text is talking about, and you have to even understand the relation between one point to another, because everything is correlated. For example, if I say supposedly I say that you write an essay on population explosion, but population explosion uh, should be correlated. The essay should not only be on population explosion. You can even say that as a side effect of population explosion, there is a lot of corruption, there is a lot of unemployment. So now that is what relatedness is all about. But you have to relate one concept to another. Identify the author's assumptions and perspectives. You have to analyze, you have to understand what does the author's perception is. What has he perceived before writing? What are assumptions that he has taken into consideration? Analyze the text and reaching a conclusion about this is again very important. Unless and until point is that you don't only have to read and understand. You have to ponder. You have to brainwash. You have to imply your brain. You have to put in a lot of effort to read between the lines to understand what is the basic crux of it. Then only you can understand what was the assumption, what was the perception about it. Then you can analyze it, and then you can reach a conclusion. You have to be on the same page with the author. Being on the same page, I told you, sharing the same perspective. Identify the strengths and weaknesses of a position. For example, if there is something that has been given to you to read and analyze and to draw a conclusion, just find out what are the weaknesses and what are the strengths of that. Unless and until you will do that SWOT analysis, you won't be able to reach a conclusion. Developing and considering alternative explanations. Like it might be that like it happens in the literary text. The author has written in some conception, but it may be that I don't like or share the same perspective. I am a person of my own choices, wishes, and fancies. I may reach another conclusion. I may decipher it as in a different fashion. She may have thought about very positive. Should have thought very positively about it, and I can reach a very negative conclusion about it. Like there are always alternative explanations. You cannot say that this is the only explanation. Like I could quote Ramcharitmanas here. There is a couplet in Ramcharitmanas in Sundarkand which says, "Bhole gawar shudh pashunari sakal taran ke adhikari." Whole, Gawar, Shudra Pashupati, Sakal Taran ke Adhikari. So now one interpretation says that Dhol, that means drum, Gawar means a rustic fellow or uneducated fellow. Shudra, who does menial tasks. According to the one system, it was written. Pashu means animal and Nari woman. The more you be strict with them, the better they perform. Like if you keep the drum tight, if you keep the rustic in place, that you have to reprimand him, you have to hold him all the time, and you keep him in strict discipline, that behave in certain manner, behave in a certain fashion. And if you keep your servants under control, you keep them in strict discipline. If you're a strict disciplinarian, they'll always perform better. And if you are a strict father, strict husband, strict brother, strict son, so definitely the woman in your life will always be very very giving towards you. She'll be very disciplined. Now, the other interpretation is that if a woman behaves in a very rustic manner, if she behaves like an animal, if she behaves like a servant, if she dresses up like a servant, and she behaves like an animal, that she gets up in the morning and she thinks about her eating and her drinking before even taking a bath, for doing any kind of rituals or putting some kind of, saying her puja or namaz, and then without even doing that, she starts eating. She has not even taken a bath till 2 in the afternoon or 11 in the morning. It's not an expected behavior from a good woman. So it's entirely how you perceive. It is how you read the text. It is how you consider, how you analyze it. You have to read between the lines. You have to understand what the author meant, what could have been his perception. And by the way, perception changes over a period of time. Earlier, sati was very much in vogue. Later, sati became, it was really hard to put an end to it. And now people can't even think about it. So, over time, even in history, even in perspective, even in historical perspective, you can say that the explanations and the analysis change. As the list implies, reading, understanding a piece of text requires far more than a passive understanding of the words and sentences it contains. It requires active engagement with the text. That is what I'm talking about. You have to actively engage yourself with the text. You just can't be a mere reader. You can't be a mere spectator. You have to involve yourself. You have to engage yourself. Ask the question, formulate and evaluate the hypothesis, do some reflection on the relation of the particular text to the other text and the information available. How do you perceive things, sir? You may like it, you may not like it. But reading and understanding is like when you can associate one thing with the other. You can associate one text with the other. That is what is done in research. We just don't read the primary data. We associate one primary data with some other data or some other secondary text, and then we come to a conclusion, we analyze, and then we reach a conclusion. Reading is not just understanding or analyzing, it's even associating one thing with the other or the other information that is available. As far as types of reading goes, one of the first things one has to learn about are that there are different techniques of reading. A student at different times uses different kinds of techniques. Like, you have to train yourself in such a way that you can actually all use these kinds of techniques. It is not out of the world. When I explain you will come to know that these are the techniques you basically follow. And every student, everybody, including me or anybody in the world, follows. They are not out of the world. They are not that you haven't practiced. It's just simply that you don't know the technical terms. Now I'm going to share the technical terms with you. So there is nothing new in communication that you don't know. Okay, you all know how to communicate. There are certain constraints because constraints of time, constraints of like resources. Like when I was a student in graduation and post graduation, there were many texts which were not available, and internet was not at all in that vogue. So what we had to do was we had to somehow manage with the photocopies. There were constraints. Now, suppose if I have a time constraint, my friend comes up on the day of examination with a note and she says, Archana, please read it. It's really very handy and it will really help you a lot writing answers on this topic. But come on, that's a 7, 8 page long data that she's giving me, information that she's giving me. 7, 8 page information is too much to gather in 2 minutes or 5 minutes. But what I'll do is that I'll devise one or the other technique to do the reading in those 5 to 8 minutes. Now, the reading techniques or the main types of reading techniques are skimming, scanning, close reading or intensive reading, and extensive reading. Skimming. If we talk about skimming, skimming is referred to as gist reading. Skimming may help in order to know what the text is all about at its most basic level. You might typically do this with a magazine or a newspaper and would help you mentally and quickly shortlist those articles which you might consider for deeper reading. You might typically skim to search for a name in a telephone directory. Now, skimming is just like taking out material. What is worth? What is your what is worth for you? Like uh, when you must have seen your mother skimming milk, buttermilk, or butter. Then what does happen? That she gets the butter out. If she's skimming the cream, she gets the buttermilk. She gets the cream. What is that? It's all about skimming. In the same way, we read to get out the material that is relevant for us. Like for an example, if I pick up the newspaper, I never go to sports section. I go to the first page and I see what catches my fancy. And if there is something on Indo-China war, or if I see anything that catches my fancy on Corona, if there is anything that catches my attention, say on a social issue or something, or a big crime that has been conducted, that has been carried out. So what I do is that I read it, then I note down the page number on which the configuration is done, and then I go on that. I skim through it, I read it, I come to that. This is what you do when you are in a hurry. You keep the things for extensive reading later. What you do is that you just skim and take out what the material is required. You just take out what is necessary for you, what is most needed by you, and then you simply leave it then and there. You can reach a speed of count of even 700 words per minute if you train yourself. When in this particular method, comprehension is of course very low and understanding of overall content is very superficial. You know, if you read at a very great speed, 700 words per minute can be read. That's not a very big deal. But the point is that you won't be able to retain it. Now, there is a difference between people who are reading a text. Actually, it even depends upon, the purpose. Like, for example, there are certain scholars who are doing their PhD on certain number of texts. Now, their reading and my reading is entirely different. The difference is the objective. My objective is to know the text, to know the storyline, to know the theme, to know the caricatures, to know the plots, to know the theory that can be applied. But what is the perspective, the objective of the aim of the scholar? The scholar reads in a very different way. Like I read a text, one text a day. I can finish off 300, 400 pages in a day. I'll take 7 to 8 hours and I will leave the text and I'll read and I'll finish it off. But if you have to understand each and everything, if you are underlining important points, if you are taking out the relevant dialogue, the text out of the novel, then it takes a lot of time because you just not are not supposed to read it. You're even supposed to remember it. You must be able to recall that such a such thing happened before and such a such thing happened later. It might have happened between somewhere between 120 to 150 page number. But my reading is somewhat superficial because I'm not bound to remember each and everything from the text. I am reading it for my knowledge. So even the aim and objective of the reader defines the kind of technique he will apply. If you stay scanning, now picture yourself visiting a historical city, guidebook in hand. You would most probably just scan the guidebook to see which site you might want to visit. Scanning involves getting your eyes to quickly scuttle across sentences and is used to get to a simple piece of information. Increasingly, research has concluded that reading off a computer screen actually inhibits the pathway to effective scanning, and thus reading of a paper is far more conducive to speedy comprehension of the text. You didn't understand it. Never mind. I'll explain. What happens is, like, suppose if somebody you go to Europe, And the tour company says that of all the European countries, you can visit four in your package. What will you do? You'll take up a guidebook. He has given you a guidebook or a brochure to rush through and find out which places you like to visit. Because there are only five places you can visit, four places you can visit in a day. So that's where your scanning comes in. You go through it and you say that I'll visit this place because this is really very famous. I want to see it, this and that. Maybe for a number of reasons, you choose one or the other place. But that is where scanning comes in. You go to the relevant information. For example, if you, the boys and girls of your age, I think many of you won't appreciate going to a picture gallery or an art gallery or to look at the painting. Many of you won't appreciate it. On the contrary, if you are asked to go to Eiffel Tower or Leaning Tower of Pizza or to some exotic place or a seashore where you can have a cabin to yourself, where the cabin is stood somewhere at the edge of the water. You can see the lapping of the water. You can even take a scurry down in the water. You can skip down in water. There are so many exotic fishes that you can go, you can look at. You can even scuba diving. You can even collect coral reefs or even some gemstones, some exotic things from the bottom of the sea. What would you prefer? Going to an art gallery? I don't think for tremendous reservoirs of energy like you people, I don't think you will like to visit an art gallery. You will definitely scan and reach the conclusion that you want to go to an exotic island to do some scuba diving because it's there in the package. You scan and you come to the desired information. Some things students do not give enough importance to the illustration. These should be included in the schedule. Special attention to the introduction and conclusion should also be. Like I have seen students that when it comes to reading, they leave out the illustrations, like especially those graph charts, those pie charts, those other charts that are given with some ratings or something. People skip that portion. Sometimes I feel that reading those portions is rather more helpful than reading the text because in a nutshell the things are explained there. And sometimes in number of times, not sometimes, but in number of times I've seen people that they skip the introduction and conclusion. Unless and until you know the launch of the topic and the denouement of the topic, how can you reach a conclusion? How can you analyze a particular text? You know nothing about how it was introduced. You don't know nothing about the conclusion, and still you think you are authority on it. Scanning requires all this. Then close reading or intensive reading. You need to have your aims clear in your mind when undertaking intensive. Remember, this is going to be far more time consuming than scanning a script. Now, if you're reading the text closely, for example, when you are reading the theorems of math or quantum physics or nanotechnology or something on the shell programming or you are reading Unix or you're studying Java or you're studying various programming techniques of C, what are you doing? You're doing close reading. You're doing an intensive reading. And it is more time consuming than scanning and skimming because you will be underlining each and everything. You'll be reaching the conclusion that even in 1 mark this can be asked. It can be asked in descriptive questions. I can be asked to make a program using this command. If you need to list the chronology of events in a long passage, you will need to read it intensely. This type of reading has been beneficial to language learners and it helps them understand vocabulary by deducing the meaning of the words in context. As I've already told you, context is really important. Unless and until you know the context of the communication, you won't be able to understand. This was the basic reason I told you that you must read the introduction carefully. Why? Because sometimes the context is given in the introduction itself. Unless and until you know the context, you won't be able to understand the text on the whole. Moreover, helps with the retention of information for a long period of time, and knowledge resulting from intensive reading persists in a long-term memory. Like if I have read something in detail, like for example, these notes. When I was editing these notes, I read a lot of material, a lot of material. Some things they were really very useful, but they were very esoteric. Esoteric means something which is difficult to understand, which is something difficult to decipher. Decipher means not hard enough to grasp when you are not able to understand. But then they were beautiful. But what was the point? They were to be made. They couldn't be taken as a part of the class notes because they were difficult. And you cannot expect a student to look into the dictionary after every 4 or 5 years. It really becomes very cumbersome. Cumbersome means tired. And it's really very boring even, very monotonous. And you have to break this chain of monotony. Monotony is boredom, regularity, regular life. Just for example, you get up early in the morning and you get ready for college, and then you come here, you study, you go back, you have your lunch, you take a nap, then you get up in the evening, you take a quick shower, you with a cup of tea or a little snack, you get down to study, and then you study for 4 or 5 hours, and then you come down for dinner, you have your dinner, you go for a walk, and then you come back, go to sleep. That is monotony. And that is where monotony has to be broken. What is Sunday meant for? Sunday is meant for breaking the monotony. Daily schedule is a breakup of that. In the same way, reading when you are reading, it helps you retain information for a long period of time. You have to do intensive reading when you are reading a concept, when you are understanding a text. You have to do intensive reading. You have to underline. You have to remember each and everything because it can be asked in objective even. If you leave out the minute details, then you won't be able to answer your objective question. And and by the way, unless and until you know the very minor things, how will you be able to express your views on major things? This is one reason why reading uh, huge amounts of information just before exam does not work very well. When students do this, they undertake neither type of reading process effectively, especially neglecting intensity. This may they may remember the answers in exam, but will likely to forget everything soon after. Like if you read huge information just before the examination, you may remember, but for a certain period of time. After the examination, you're doomed to forget. You won't be able to remember anything. And it happens with everybody. We read huge amounts of information, but we tend to forget because that is not that does not get retained in our active memory. It is sorry in our conscious memory. It is just like for a time being, and then you forget. Then is extensive reading. Extensive reading involves reading for pleasure. Like as I told you that I'm very fond of reading novels, drama. So what happens is that I read it for pleasure. I derive a lot of pleasure from it. Like people derive pleasure from listening to music. People have this habit of watching TV. They have a habit of they like watching movies in cinema. I have I derive pleasure from reading books. And extensive reading is done for pleasure because there is an element of enjoyment in extensive reading. It is unlikely that students will undertake extensive reading of a text as they do not like reading as a hobby. Very few of the students I have found in my career who came to me that I'm really fond of reading. Other than their course books, they read novels, plot boilers, literary texts, or classics. I found schools rare in this space with the digitalization, with so much of Netflix, Hotstar, and everything. Reading has lost its basic fabric. People have lost interest in reading, and it requires a fluid decoding and assimilation of the text and context in front of you. What happens is that when you are doing extensive reading, you are not only doing it for pleasure, but you have to be very fluid in decoding and assimilating. Assimilation means absorption of the text and the content in front of you. You have to, visualize the characters. You have to understand what is said in the words and in between the words. There is a way that कुछ चीजें कह दी जाती है और कुछ चीजें समझ ली जाती है. Extensive reading is just like that. When you have to sometimes read, but you have to understand it. You have to swim against the current. You have to go against the grain and understand, read between the lines, and then come to a conclusion. You have to live with the content. If the text is difficult, you stop every few minutes to figure out what is being said or to look up new words in the dictionary. You are breaking your concentration and diverting your thought. As I told you earlier, that I don't believe in using very difficult words during lecturing and during the course of taking notes. Why? Because what's the point in making somebody look into the dictionary by and by? Because it's very boring. It breaks your concentration and it even diverts. And it irritates you even to an extent that you say, "Arey, yeah, leave it. I'll do it later on." It's I can't look into the dictionary at every sentence. Some people derive pleasure in it. As I was other day told you J.B. Priestley. J.B. Priestley wrote an essay on being simple. He said simplicity is a virtue, and more learned the person is, the more simple the person is. Because being simple is very difficult. The other day I told you that my son asked me the meaning of satisfied. Believe me, I was, dumbstruck. I was like, how should I explain the word satisfied? Because satisfied is a very easy word. For me, it's very easy. But he didn't know the meaning of satisfied. And it is there that when you come to simple writing, when you come to expressing yourself in simplicity, that it becomes really hard. Because writing difficult words is very easy. You take a thesaurus, you'll find many difficult words. But when people are able to understand you, when people are able to read, that is the success of the communication. Okay, so extensive reading, intensive reading, or close reading, scanning, and skimming. These are the four kinds of reading techniques that one can resort to. Now, the next thing is reading of literary texts and other knowledge texts. This is where I come to an end of my 8th session. I will begin with this topic in my next session. So take care, stay safe, enjoy your life, enjoy the beauty of communication. Express your thoughts, understand others, and go through as much material as you can. It will widen your horizon. It will improve your reading and writing skills. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye bye. See you in the next session soon.